I'm very grateful for the privilege of being allowed to have some time to make a few introductory remarks at the beginning of this remarkable and admirably comprehensive conference which we are entering into. Now, the search for truth. In a common quest for truth, the natural conversation for science and engagement with religion is the discipline of theology. Theology's character as intellectual reflection on human encounter with sacred reality parallels science's intellectual reflection on human encounter with physical reality. I believe that these two great enterprises, the enterprises of science and theology, bear a cousinly relationship to each other, and that they share in a search for truthful understanding that is to be achieved through the attainment of well-motivated belief. In this truth-seeking quest, neither discipline will be able to claim that it achieves absolute certainty beyond the possibility of any further refinement or correction. Rather, its achievement will be a gaining of a degree of understanding which is sufficiently insightful in its explanatory character for its acceptance to be something which is entirely rational to commit oneself. In the case of science, this kind of judgment has been carefully analysed and defended by Michael Polanyi in his important book, Personal Knowledge. Polanyi, of course, was someone whose career as a distinguished physical chemist meant that he knew science from the inside. In his account of science, he said he was seeking to understand how he could commit himself to what he believed to be true, though he knew that it might eventually prove to be false. And I believe the best that we can achieve in any form of human inquiry into truth is a kind of convergent realism, making maps of domains of reality which are adequate for some, but not for every purpose. Science is not as unproblematically factual as people sometimes suppose. There are no significant scientific facts and not already interpreted facts. Raw instrumental readings only gain significance when they are interpreted by a theoretical understanding of what the experimental configuration is actually capable of measuring. Thus, in science, theory and experiment intertwine. The theory interprets experiments, and experiments confirm or disconfirm theories. And this circularity implies a degree of intellectual precariousness, though I think that the long-term fertility of the interaction, which often leads to the explanation or even prediction of phenomena not taken into account when a theory was conceived, that this amazing history of success strongly encourages the belief that the circularity is benign and not vicious, a conclusion which supports the realist conviction held by almost all scientists that what they come to know is indeed a reliable guide to what is actually the case. On its part, theology has long wrestled with the dialectical necessity both to believe in order to understand, and to understand in order to believe. Its truth-seeking task has similarities to that of science, but its quest is, of course, much more challenging, since science, on its part, engages with a physical world that we transcend and can put to the experimental test. The theology subject is the transcendent reality of God, the one whose infinite nature cannot be subjected to contrived human probing by experiment. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. It's just a fundamental fact of the spiritual life. There is an inescapable dimension of reserve and apophatic mystery in theological discourse, but that does not mean by any means that it is simply reduced to science. We need, I think, to recognize that science has achieved its very great success by the modesty of its ambition. It asks essentially, I think, only one basic question. What are the processes by which events occur in the physical world? Whether there is also something going on in what is happening, that is to say, questions of meaning and value and purpose, is deliberately bracketed out by science. But this by no means implies those questions are not of the greatest significance, as we all know. And such questions are, of course, central to theology. We are perfectly familiar with the need to ask both kinds of questions, the questions of process and questions of purpose, if we are properly to understand what is going on. To use a homely illustration, which I'm fond of, is a kettle is boiling in my kitchen because burning gas heats the water, on the one hand, and the kettle is boiling on the other hand because I want to make a cup of tea. We do not have to choose between those two statements, but both are true and both are necessary for the full understanding of the mysterious event of the boiling kettle. Now, neither science nor theology can pretend to be able to answer the other's questions. But even if the questions are different, their answers must, of course, bear some form of consistent relationship with each other. Putting the kettle in the refrigerator is not consonant with the desire to make a cup of tea. Process and purpose must stand in a congruent relationship. Recognizing these facts implies that science and theology complement each other rather than being in conflict. For example, it is surely clear that theological discourse on creation has been significantly, I would say very fruitfully, influenced by the discovery that we live in a world of evolving becoming, rather than thinking of the entire 13.7 billion year history of the universe itself, the course of which an initial expanding ball of energy has become the home of saints and scientists, or of evolutionary biology's account of the 3.5 billion year history of terrestrial life, which an initial world of bacteria, as we've just been reminded, has become the home of self-conscious human life. And religious people who are seeking to serve the God of truth should welcome the discoveries of science. Science doesn't give us all the truth, but it certainly gives us some of the truth. And the difference in character between science and theology, the different questions that they ask, does not mean they have nothing to say to each other. There is, in fact, a natural frontier region where they meet. It lies in the consideration of what one may call meta-questions. These are questions that arise from the experience of doing science, but in their character are such that the latter's self-limiting scope of inquiry implies that it is unable of itself to provide the answers. An example would be to ask why modern science is actually possible, probing so profoundly into the deep structure of the physical universe. We tend to take this for granted, but if we stop to think about it, I think we shall see that it is surely a fact of significance. Physicists are able to understand regimes, such as subatomic physics, which demand counterintuitive ways of thinking, quite different from the ordinary modes of thought whose success might simply be assumed to arise from our brains having been shaped by the evolutionary necessity of survival in an everyday environment. As a prime example of counterintuitive thinking in physics, I shall shortly discuss the case of quantum theory. Moreover, it turns out that a powerful guide to successful discovery in fundamental physics is often provided by a quest for mathematical beauty in the equations being considered. My great scientific hero is Paul Dirac, who was one of the founding figures of quantum theory and, of course, a professor in Cambridge for many years. And he was once asked what his fundamental belief was. And he was a man of few words, so he strode to a blackboard and he wrote on it, "The laws of physics are written in beautiful equations." He said it was a very profitable religion to embrace, and he made his great discoveries by a lifelong pursuit of mathematical beauty. His brother-in-law and the distinguished nuclear physicist Eugene Wigner once asked, why is mathematics so unreasonably effective? Why does this seemingly abstract subject provide the key to unlock the deep secrets of the physical universe? What links together the reason within, that's to say our mathematical thoughts, and the reason without, the order of the universe? Scientists are, of course, very happy to exploit the remarkable opportunities provided by the wonderful rational transparency of the world. But simply as scientists, they are unable to offer an explanation of it. Yet it would surely be intellectually lazy just to treat it as a happy accident, to shrug our shoulders and say, bit of good luck for you chaps who are good at maths. Theology offers, I believe, what is a satisfying and persuasive understanding. It sees the rationally beautiful world of fundamental physics, a world shot through with signs of mind, you might say, as reflecting the capital M mind of the Creator, in an ancient and powerful phrase that understands the remarkable success of science as one sign that we are creatures made in the image of our Creator. A second meta question asked, why is the universe so special? Now, scientists prefer the general to the particular, so our expectation was that the cosmos would be just a typical specimen of what a universe might be like. This, of course, as I'm sure you know, has not proved to be the case. While life only appeared about 10 billion years after about 10 billion years of cosmic history, the universe was pregnant with that possibility from the start. And by that I mean the laws of nature took exactly the very specific form necessary to allow carbon-based life to be able to evolve. For example, we are people of stardust, made of the ashes of dead stars. For the only place where carbon can be formed, the element which of course is fundamental to the biochemistry of life, the only place where carbon can be formed is in the interior nuclear furnaces of the stars. And the process is very delicate, and it requires the nuclear forces involved to lie within very narrow limits. If they were outside those limits, we wouldn't be here thinking about it today. But science treats these laws of nature, these basic laws of physics, as its unexplained basis for understanding what's going on in the world. But their finely tuned character, as one might say, seems to point beyond them, to demand some deeper explanation. Again, it would seem intolerably intellectually lazy just to shrug our shoulders and say, we're here because we're here, so why worry? Those seeing fine-tuning as an expression of the creative divine will, of course, offers such an explanation. And those who recoil from this approach are driven to the rather desperate expedient of hypothesizing the existence of a multiverse, a vast array of different universes, of which only one, our own of course, is observationally accessible to us, with its finely tuned fertility being seen as just a lucky chance in a kind of gigantic cosmic lottery. And actually, without further specificity, even an infinite multiverse, an infinite number of other universes, would not be enough on itself to guarantee that there was one member with the necessary properties for carbon-based life. After all, there are an infinite number of even integers, but none of them has the property of oddness. Considerations of this kind, of the deep order of the world and the inbuilt fertility of the universe, have led to a kind of revival of natural theology, the attempt to learn something of God by the use of reason and the inspection of the world. And natural theology of this revived kind is a modest endeavor, claiming insight rather than logical demonstration. It does not talk of proofs of God, and its scope is limited by the kind of general experience to which it restricts its appeal. If you give it the greatest success in its claims, at best, it can only lead to a rather thin concept of divinity, God as the great mathematician or the cosmic architect. But in its own modest way, it helps to put the question of God on the agenda of truth-seeking rational inquiry. To learn more of God, we have to look elsewhere, the more specific insights, I believe, of revelational theology. Now, because I see science and theology as cousins under the skin in their common search for truth, I believe that there are some useful lessons that science has learned in its quest, which also are of relevance to theology. For if science teaches us anything about reality, it is surely that it is often surprising, so that one must be open to the possibility of having to revise what had previously been held to be self-evident. My own subject for quantum physics makes the point readily enough. No one in 1899 would have believed it possible that an entity could sometimes behave like a wave, that is spread out and oscillating, a flappy sort of thing, and on other occasions as a little bullet, a particle. In fact, a philosophically minded person in 1899 would, I'm sure, have been only too glad to prove the impossibility of such oxymoronic behavior. Yet, as we all know, that is how light has actually been found to behave. For about 25 years, physicists had to live uncomfortably with the strange state of affairs, until the insights of Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and Dirac led to modern quantum theory. And this discovery dissolved the paradox. Its resolution lay in the discovery of what is called the superposition principle. In the quantum world, there are not only states with definite properties, such as an electron being here or being there, but there are also states which are unpicturable mixtures of both here and there, a kind of middle term, of course, undreamt of by Aristotle. In consequence, a new type of logic doesn't follow the law of the excluded middle. A new type of logic operates in the quantum world, quite different from the common sense logic of every day. Analysis shows that this fact explains wave-particle duality, with wave states corresponding to states with indefinite numbers of particles. As a consequence of this kind of surprising need for counterintuitive thinking, the natural question for a scientist to ask about a proposition, whether within science or beyond it, is not, is it reasonable? As if we felt we knew beforehand the shape the rationality had to take. No one in 1899 would regard wave-particle duality as reasonable. Rather, the question to ask is, what makes you think that might be the case? This is an open form of inquiry. No possibility is being ruled out a priori. If a surprising proposal is to be made, it would have to be backed up by an adequate motivating evidence. I'd like to call this kind of open thinking, which seeks to move from the particulars of experience to the achievement of illuminating understanding, I'd like to call this bottom-up thinking, in contrast with top-down thinking, which believes it can start with general ideas so clear and certain in their character that they can reliably shape and constrain our thinking about particulars. This latter kind of thought was, of course, the grand ambition of the Enlightenment, and it was a noble aim, but it has proved to be unattainable. The truth of the matter, I think, is that there is no absolutely universal rationality that fits all situations, but entities have to be thought about in a manner that conforms to their actual nature. We can think about the clear and orderly Newtonian world of macroscopic events in one way, but the cloudy and fitful world of subatomic quantum events has to be thought of in a quite different fashion. In theology, we have to think about the divine nature in ways that conform to its intrinsic character. Christianity's belief in the duality of the human and the divine in Jesus Christ is more profoundly mysterious than the wave-particle duality of light. Yet that Christian belief also arose from wrestling with experience, I believe, rather than from ungrounded metaphysical speculation. We can see the process beginning in the New Testament accounts of the life-transforming power of the risen Christ, where the writers, despite being monotheistic Jews, found that they were unable to talk about Jesus without using divine-sounding language about him if they were to do justice to their experience. And the process of wrestling with this has, of course, continued in the Christological thinking of the Church down the centuries. I'm entirely happy to approach my Christian belief in this bottom-up fashion. And in fact, I sought to do so in my Gifford lectures. Just as there is no universal epistemology, I think there is no universal rationality. I think there is no universal epistemology either. Particular entities have to be known in the specific way that accords with their specific nature. Any attempt to know the quantum world with the clarity of Newtonian thinking is simply condemned to failure. That world can only be known in accordance with the limits of the uncertainty principle. And God can only be known in a way that respects the awe and obedience appropriate to encounter with the infinite mystery of divinity. There's one final lesson I would like to draw from the experience of being a scientist, that it may seem at first sight surprising, but I wish to affirm the indispensability of some form of metaphysical thinking. Many scientists, of course, are suspicious or even contemptuous of metaphysics, asserting that they have no need for such speculative activity. However, it seems to me, properly understood, metaphysics is simply the search for an overarching worldview. And no one surely can be indifferent to that. It seems to me that we think metaphysics as naturally and inevitably as we speak prose. The materialist who tells us that matter is the only rationality, the only questions worth asking and capable of being answered are scientific questions, that materialist has gone far beyond what an honest assessment of science's actual capacity could establish. And once again, the kind of point I'm trying to make here can be illustrated by considering quantum theory. Now, quantum physics is unquestionably statistical in character. It can only calculate the relative probabilities of different possible outcomes of an interaction. But it cannot say which particular outcome will actually occur on a particular occasion. But this degree of intrinsic unpredictability might be either epistemic or ontological in its origin. That is to say, it might arise from unavoidable ignorance of all the detailed factors that actually determine the outcome. That would be the epistemological option. Or it might arise from a fundamental indeterminacy present in nature itself, the ontological option. And interestingly, physics by itself cannot determine which of these possibilities is the correct one. Niels Bohr's Copenhagen interpretation corresponds, of course, to the ontological option. For it, the uncertainty principle is a principle of actual indeterminacy. However, David Bohm constructed an alternative interpretation of quantum unpredictability whose character is epistemological. For Bohm, the uncertainty principle is certainly a principle of necessary ignorance. These two quite different interpretations yield exactly the same empirical consequences, so the choice to be made between them cannot be made solely on scientific grounds. Majority of physicists, of whom I am one certainly, opt for Bohr because we think that Bohm's clever theory is perhaps a little too clever by half. It has about an air of contrivance which is meta-scientifically unattractive. So you see, my little example shows you that even so fundamental question as the nature of physical causality cannot be settled on purely scientific grounds alone. We just cannot do without some form of metaphysical commitment. The question of truth is as fundamental to theology as it is to science. Otherwise, religious belief would amount to nothing more than wishful thinking. I like to consider myself as two-eyed, seeking to view reality with a binocular vision of both scientific and theological insight. I believe that that yields understanding more satisfying than either perspective could yield on its own. Thank you very much.